Hey, what's up, guys? Real quick, it's Halloween night, so and it's like it's a summer night. It's freaking hot as hell. Yeah, I should have gone down to Florida for this. But the Robert Howard, of course, when you think of Conan, you think of King Cole, think of Solomon Kane, right? Or when you think of like the movies that were inspired in the early '80s when they started making Conan films and like sword and sorcery films. Lucio Fulci made one. Remember Conquest? The Beastmaster, brilliant film. The Sword and the Mother effing Sorcerer. A lot of good films, right? But when you watch those films, there was always a very brutal, dark, horror, supernatural element to all of them. And I argue Robert E. Howard, his horror stories, right? They're a little different now from, like, let's say Lovecraft, although they were correspondence. I mean, there's literally 3 volumes of thick books on their correspondence. There's nothing like when Lovecraft found out that Howard had committed suicide. The impact that I had on him was probably the biggest impact on him that you could think of. Like literally a shock of someone who was like you would think would be unshockable, right? And these are good collections. This one's from I think '96. This was from '78. This is on Bram McMorgan. Now, these are horror stories. The horror stories of Robert E. Howard, right? These are all. This is a Del Rey book. But in terms of the books, his horror stories. I mean, a lot of his. I mean, Man Eaters of Zambulla, the Queen of the Black Coast. I mean, there's always supernatural creatures and horrors in Howard's stories, right? But the man fighting is always the hero doesn't have access to magic, right? The hero is just a fucking badass motherfucking man with a blade in his hand, right? But it's always interesting and how he deals with it. You can argue, and someone made a point that the way to deal with the cosmic horror of this world is to be Conan, be like Robert E. Howard, his characters. There's some merit to that. So, in terms of this story, I got this in Saint Augustine, right? And this one in particular, but the other one as well, the collection. Some of these stories are very, very dicey. Black Canaan, right? Black Hound of Death. That's probably my favorite story. A lot of these stories. The Moon of Zimbabwe. I don't know how to say this. What's the word? What should I say? There's a lot of racial stuff in it. Okay. Now, if you actually read it, it's nuanced. It's not totally what you think or what someone would think today. Okay, but it is pretty much the crux of like what we're living in. Okay, this economic conflict, racial conflict on many levels, gender conflict as well. You can argue that's a new in terms of the intensity of it, right? Where the gender war we always had has been turned in on itself. But in terms of the stories, man, I mean, I recommend these. And why do I recommend? There's a from the same publisher as this is the horror stories of Robert Howard. I would recommend that. But Bram McMorgan, this character, right, the leader of the Picts, people who are the dark-haired, short people who lived in the British Isles, who survive in Wales today, or maybe parts of Scotland, like Caledonia, as they called it, the Fen, the people of the Heath, right, the heathens, the Picts, right, the people that the Romans built the wall against. Bram McMorgan is their leader, literally a leader of a people who are being genocided by a series of invasions, followed by the greatest power of all at the time in the world, the Romans. Right? But I'll read a little part of the little story here, of course. Yeah, my favorite one, the one that makes me go, "Oh damn," is Black Hound of Death. I'm surprised that Howard has not been canceled at this point, but who knows? So I'll read this little. This is an example of like the kind of horror that he does. Uh, see. There we go. And this is the character, the main character, the hero, the white man fighting the villain here, Tope Braxton, probably an ancestor of Tony Braxton. I'd always wondered what would be the outcome of a battle between me and Tope Braxton. One can hardly go about picking fights with black men. But now a fierce joy surged in me, a grim gratification that the question of our relative prowess was to be settled once and for all, with life for the winner and death for the loser. Even as I gripped him, Braxton realized that I had tricked him into freeing me, that I was no more crippled than he was. Instantly, he exploded into a hurricane of ferocity that would have dismembered a lesser man than I. We rolled in the pine needles, rending and tearing. Were I penning an elegant romance, I should tell you how I vanquished Tope Braxton by a combination of higher intelligence, boxing skill, and death science that defeated his brute strength. But I must stick to facts in this chronicle. Intelligence played little part in that battle. It would have helped me no more than it would have helped a man in the actual grip of a gorilla. Ooh. As for artificial skill, Tope would have torn the average boxer or wrestler limb from limb. Man-developed science alone could not have withstood the blinding speed, tigerish ferocity, and bone-crushing strength that led to Tope Braxton's terrible thews. It was like fighting a wild beast, and I met him at his own game. That's right. Fought Tope Braxton as the rivermen fight. A savages fight, as bull apes fight, breast to breast, muscle straining against muscle, iron fist crushing against hard skull, knee driven to groin, teeth slashing sinewy flesh, gouging, tearing, smashing, right? All in, right? Like those old, those old frontier fights. If you looked them up, we both forgot the pistols on the ground. We must have rolled over them half a dozen times. Each of us was aware of only one desire, one blind crimson urge. To kill with naked hands, to rend and tear and maul and trample until the other was a motionless mass of bloody flesh and splintered bone. Oof, damn. So now I'll end this with the Bram McMorn. Now, like I said, from this publisher, there's the horror stories of Robert E. Howard, but Bram McMorn, right? I keep bringing him up. This might be one of the best stories he ever wrote. You could argue it's a historical horror story. This character, Bram McMorn, he's a Pictish leader. He's a short, dark-haired Mediterranean type of the type that you did have in Europe back then, when the Romans were more Nordic, I guess you'd say. And of course, he's occupied by the Romans. He has to take their humiliations as an occupied country, but he plots revenge against them. And in order to do that, he makes a deal with the inhabitants, the original inhabitants of Britain, that his race at one point had subjugated, conquered, and driven on the ground. What race was this? A race that was hardly human. The worms of the earth. Right? He has to make a deal with the half-breed witch woman related to them in order to get his revenge. This is probably one of the best Robert Howard stories ever, and highly recommended. Particularly the ending too, when he does get his revenge. It's totally just. It's nothing like he wanted. Which is actually a brilliant ending. It's not what he wanted. Like the revenge that happens, he goes against it because it's not what he wanted. And of course, the worms of the earth. What a friggin', like I said, one of the best Robert Howard stories ever. So, and all of these are recommended, and you can find these stories in different collections. So, anyway.